One of Desness's priorities is to support global action. Indeed, you, Secretary of State, have just said climate leadership, the biggest of which is arguably the Paris Agreement. Given that 24 is the first year where we've officially breached the 1.5 degree threshold and that COP29 received a good deal of criticism, what is your perception of the global momentum for climate action, especially considering that some of the largest polluting states, China, India and USA, seem somewhat less interested in climate leadership?
You know, it's interesting this, because as I said earlier, I've been at this a long time. I would say that one of the things that has changed since I was last in this job is that the transition is now unstoppable. If you think about this reality, 90% of the world is now covered by net zero targets. And, you know, when I was at COP recently, it was a very difficult COP for a whole range of reasons, but I think there was a will to get an agreement. Indeed, we did get an agreement on finance, not perfect, but we got an agreement. Now, I'm not trying to look at this through rose-tinted spectacles, because you can hold two truths in your mind at the same time. One, that the transition is unstoppable, and secondly, it's not going nearly fast enough. And I think both truths are correct. That the world is moving. When you look at what, for example, China has done in terms of the installation of renewable energy in the last year, I'm going to be going to India shortly, which is also moving on renewable energy. Now, that isn't to say that it's all one-way traffic when it comes to China, India, and so on, but the world is moving, and I think, look, part of the role of UK leadership here is to do the right thing at home, because it's the right thing for energy security, and as I've set out. But we're only 1% of emissions, and so then the power of example really matters, and working with others. And just to make this other point, when we passed the Cross-Party Climate Change Act in 2008, when I was last Secretary of State, that was then emulated by countries around the world. More than 20 countries, I think, Chris, have done their own equivalents of the Climate Change Committee.
That's right.
So we shouldn't underestimate the impact of British leadership. So it's really tough. I think the transition is unstoppable, but we need to make it move faster.
Thank you.
So effectively, you do believe that COP is still fit for purpose?
I think it is a very imperfect vehicle, but it's the best one we've got. I mean, you know, this is 198 dimensional chess that you're playing, because every country is there negotiating on their behalf. So, you know, it's like, seeing the making of the sausage is not pleasant, but there isn't, it seems to me, a better alternative. I'm sure there's ways it can be.
The question that's allocated to me is to ask you how the decision to set the NDC target at 81% emissions cut was reached. But actually, I think we know that it was the advice from the Climate Change Committee that produced it. So maybe I could move one level on from that, which is to ask what sort of financial and legislative support needs to be in place for that to happen? And critically, what are the costs? Who are the costs going to be borne by? Have you done any sort of cost-benefit analysis in this area?
Well, thank you, Lord Frost. So as you say, the decision was based on advice from the Climate Change Committee, but it's really important to say that it's actually an NDC that we put in, that we've put forward based on the decisions made by Boris Johnson on Carbon Budget 6. So when he was the Prime Minister, he legislated for Carbon Budget 6. The best estimate of the costs comes from an impact assessment signed off by Anne-Marie Trevelyan in April 2021. Now, it estimates the cost of achieving the sixth carbon budget equivalent to 1.6% of the UK's expected GDP. It's really important to say that's an investment cost, so public and private investment. It considers a net present value, so a positive benefit to the country, of £266 billion. And it's just, and it also says in that impact assessment that part of the reason for that is because of the overall policy objective of mitigating the potentially catastrophic effects of climate change. And so I think it's sort of really important to say that that carbon budget decision was a really important basis for our NDC decision. And the context really to this is the view of the widely held view now, not just the Stern report, but the OBR, I think the Bank of England as well, which is the dangers of not acting when it comes to the climate crisis, as well as the positive benefits from acting.
The actions that are needed to help us get to this target. And the first one it lists is that is making electricity cheaper. And indeed, Secretary of State, you just asserted that renewables were getting cheaper. I'm a bit confused because I was reading a blog written by Dieter Helm a few days ago, who of course is an expert on this subject, and he says, and I quote, "It would be wonderful if it were true, that is, renewables cost falling, but it isn't anytime soon." And he says the UK and the EU are, I quote, "telling fairy tales that it's all going to be cheaper here," end quote. Do you think Mr. Helm's got this wrong?
I don't agree with him, Lord Frost. If you look at the strike prices achieved in CFD allocation round 6, so that's our most recent allocation round, which happened under this government, the offshore wind strike price was £59 per megawatt hour in 2012 prices, £80 in today's prices, means it's cheaper to build and operate than gas. That was based on what was set out in the 2023 electricity generations cost report. Second, so the first point, it's the cheapest forms of power to build and operate. Second, we know from the NESO report on clean power by 2030 that the system costs are no greater and there is scope for bills to fall in a clean power system. And thirdly, I'll just be honest with you, Lord Frost, I think you and I aren't going to agree on this because you, in my view, want to gamble in the fossil fuel casino with the British people's money. And I think we know how that turned out, because what happened was we gambled in that casino after Russia invaded Ukraine, and the British people, British businesses, the public finances paid the price.